The practice elements, the foundation of the practice. This thing is focused on laying the groundwork so that you can ensure that your people and your patients are supported. Just as if you have a house and the foundation crumbles, everything crumbles. You lose it all. You can't have people on your team and patients that you're serving if you don't have a strong foundation underneath of it. The core principle that we teach and we stand by is the money funnel. And the money funnel is going to show you the 5 major places that you need to be focused on to see where's your money leaking out at. You've got to have dashboards monitoring these 5 areas and training and holding your team accountable to each of these 5 metrics. As you begin to focus and increase the focus around each of these 5 A's, the 5 A's are what we call them. I'll tell you what they are here in just a couple minutes. Those areas, as you make incremental changes, this is the magic in the 5 A's and the money funnel. If you can take each of these 5 stages and you can increase this stage 10% and this stage 10% and this stage 10%, you can double the money in your bank account. And this isn't voodoo math. This isn't spreadsheet management where you give an Excel spreadsheet and a directive to your team and say, go do it. And then tomorrow your team has a coup d'etat and they revolt against you and there's all this drama. That's not the way we do this. You've got to lead your team by combining the marketing and the training and the management. And when you can combine those 3 things, that's when you start to really hum. If you're a current client of ours, you've already seen some of this. I'm about to show you the next iteration of the practice growth system. And this thing goes way beyond just the practice elements that you've already been using in your practice. Many practices I know have a lot of goals, or they have some goals. But many of those practices in the 90% range don't know what they're going to do to get there. Let me give you an example. I know a lot of $1 million practices that say their goal for this year is 1.3 million. And when I ask them how they're going to get there, they just say, we're going to do it. They say, well, we're going to get more new patients. We're going to spend more on marketing. Okay. Those are 1 or 2 little levers that you can pull. And getting more new patients is often an expensive lever in some cases. This is coming from a marketing guy, right? Your team doesn't know any more than you do about how they need to go hit their goals. And if you don't have the plan and the strategy broken down and how you're going to go do it, I'm going to bet the house that you don't go do it. And that doesn't mean you don't really want to do it. It just means we have to be really intentional about the actions we take. And I'm going to talk more about that here in 3 slides in order to get the result that we want. Doing the same thing and expecting different results is insanity. It's what Einstein said. And we plan practices in 90-day sprints. It's highly, highly effective to focus on 3 months at a time and break this thing down. I've said 100 times in the past 2 months, to overcome this shutdown, you've got to increase your collections 15 to 20% over the next 4 to 6 months if you want to make the same money you did last year. If you don't, and you want to look in the mirror and say, I'm okay making a lot less money this year, then that's your decision. And just be honest with yourself about it. That's not judgmental from me. I'm just asking you to be honest. Don't think you're going to make the same money if you don't do something different. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. And you've got to create the profit in order to reinvest in your team, to reinvest in your practice, to expand or buy new equipment. All that stuff comes from profit. If you don't have profit, you're not paying yourself. You're not having the free time and family time that you're looking for. All this stuff, profit is not some evil capitalistic concept. Profit is required to do those 5 things. If you want to grow and invest and buy new equipment and expand and have the freedom to do what you want to do in your life, profit is the fuel you need to do that. Let's talk about the people. The people in your practice, your team, they're focused on building what we call the team-driven practice. This is a group of highly motivated, highly accountable, driving towards the shared vision and goals that you have. And I use that shared word very intentionally. Nothing is more important than having A players right now. Bench strength is critical if you want to survive coming out of this. You're not going to survive coming out of this if you have B players on your bench. What's your process for driving success across your people? Here's some questions to ask yourself. What's your team huddle process? What data are you leaning on to drive your focus and your results? What dashboards are you looking at daily, monthly, weekly even, right? How are you hiring and retaining your A players? There's going to be an abundance of A players coming out of this thing. How are you going to maximize your team and do it profitably at a sustainable level at 25 or 30%, so you can compensate your A players greatly because we want to retain them, and we also want to make sure that we're maximizing the profit coming out of the practice so we can reinvest in the community, in our practice, and in ourselves and in our team. The reality is, if your 30 to 35% of your collection goes to labor, you're a little overweight. If your 35 or 40 or 45% of your collections goes to labor, you're in the obese category. And that's something that, again, you run your practice how you want to run it. I'm only going to give you the data and the opinion that I have. And then you got to look in the mirror and go do it. And this isn't my practice. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm just going to give you the view of how we've seen it and are seeing it done very successfully in 49 states right now across the country. I'm still looking for a client in Alaska because I'd love to go up there and work one. Those of you, you know I love Alaska. Anyway, we're not going to get talking about Alaska again tonight. If you don't run a lean team, you're not going to be able to comp your A players enough, and you're going to have churn. And you know churn's expensive. You're also dipping into the profits of the practice, and you're not going to have the cash to reinvest. Or, as we're seeing right now, a lot of businesses don't have enough cash on the sidelines to carry them during bad times. Let's talk about Richard Branson. He's worth $5 billion, and he's trying to loan against his private Necker Island because he has no cash. The owner of the Houston Rockets has been turned down by all the major banks to get a loan. He's trying to raise $250 million, and he's willing to pay 15% interest. And he's circulating a private memo right now to try to raise $250 million to get him through the next 3 months. These guys that we thought had all the money in the world, turns out they couldn't survive a 2 to 3 month shutdown. And I don't say that meaning that this hasn't been extremely difficult, but my outlook on the world is if you got $5 billion, you're drinking margaritas on the beach during this thing, not scrambling because you have no money on the sidelines. And that's a really, really painful and expensive problem. If you've had more than 5% annually of your team churn out, you may want to focus on your hiring and your retention systems. If you've said to yourself, man, great people are just really hard to find, and I go through a few, I'm going to suggest that you look at an A-player recruiting system. The problem is not necessarily in the people. The problem is that the systems are often too subjective, and they're not evaluating people based on the cultural fit and the performance goals in your practice. We had a client join in Georgia last week, and he talked about his need for understanding the system and not piecemealing all this stuff together. And I think that when I was talking to him about that, that made a lot of sense. And we've talked about the system for a long time, but you've got, just as the people, the practice, and the patients overlap, you've got to have a cohesive system that holds this thing together. The patients, let's talk about the patients. Everybody loves talking about the patients. This is the funnest part of the practice because this is where you really get to serve people and help them with their problems. And all the foundational stuff you've built really starts to shine and your results start multiplying up. I talked earlier about attracting the right kinds of patients, which is absolutely critical. When you get the wrong patients, a few things happen. Cancellations and no-shows for one. You might have super nice people. If you don't have a system that prioritizes your patients into ABC buckets, you're losing a lot of money in your hygiene department. If you have no available appointments for the next 3 weeks in your hygiene appointment, you're leaving a boatload of money on the table, $10,000 to $20,000 a month. And this is all stuff we talk about in some of the material that we're releasing, the data, the trainings, and everything. Cancellations and no-shows are super, super expensive. We need to look at which patients are most likely to accept treatment coming out of this crisis. Who better to put in our chair than patients that have an unscheduled treatment plan and in the past have accepted over 80% of the treatment we've proposed? That's a winning combination. If you had a list of your patients right now that had unspent insurance benefits and they had unscheduled treatment, that would be a great list to have. What about patients that historically have accepted over 80% of the treatment that we put in front of them and are under 60 years old? That'd be a great list to have. If I had a dental practice, I would love to have that data. And that's the kind of data that we give to our practices through our analytics software. I think it's very, very likely hygiene is going to be down in many market areas. Or if it's not down, you're going to have a surge, and then that surge is going to dry up and it's going to be down. How are you going to prioritize the restorative treatment to offset the hygiene losses? And how are you going to fill your restorative schedule if you're reliant upon your hygiene department and your hygiene is dried up? How are you going to put patients in the chair that you know are going to accept treatment so you can shore up your finances for a few months after you reopen? And you're not going to get on this average patient value roller coaster. We don't want to get on the roller coaster coming out of this thing. That would be catastrophic. And what I mean by the roller coaster is oftentimes you're seeing just as many new patients, you're working just as many hours, paying just the same amount of payroll, except your collections just does this. And there never seems to be enough at the end of the month. You got to get off the roller coaster. The 5 A's and the money funnel will show you how to do that. We had another doctor in Indianapolis join a couple weeks ago, and he said he had a Swiss cheese schedule, I call it, holes all over the schedule, small case sizes coming in, and he understands that there's not going to be pent-up demand when he reopens. And those holes in his schedule combined with lack of pent-up demand is going to mean he needs to be very proactive with scheduling quality patients that are looking for implants and cosmetics and other elective case procedures. I think that's going to be very critical as we all come out of this thing. I think the reality is, as we're coming out of this, there's going to be one thing that holds fundamentally true. And that is that as this tide goes out, we're going to see who's been swimming naked. There's abundance of business owners and dentists and doctors and optometrists across the board that have not prepared for this thing to reopen. They've not adapted to the world. And when the tide goes out and business opens up, we're going to see who's out there skinny dipping. Here we are shut down right now. Today, we're shut down, or you're doing emergencies only, and you've got some portion of your revenue coming in. Reopen is approaching you very, very fast. Very fast. As of today, Richard Branson is no longer a billionaire, and that happened in 2 weeks. As I said a few minutes ago, Richard's looking for a lender to give him money to loan on his private island. It's the last asset he has that's unencumbered. Oil for May is at negative $37 a barrel. In my lifetime, I'd never dreamed something like this would happen. And the owner of the Houston Rockets, who's one of Forbes' 400 richest Americans, is offering 15% interest to raise $250 million. He's circulating a private memo, and he's even willing to let you take the first month's 15% out of the capital contribution that you write to him. So if you have a high appetite for risk, and you got a minimum of $1 million on the sideline, and you want to make 15% on it with a very high appetite for risk that you may never get it back, I can forward you his private memo that's been circulating. I think there's a possibility that a lot of workers aren't going back to work because they're making more money on unemployment, and they're going to be very short-sighted about their future.